Good evening, everybody. Gosh, it's really exciting to see so many people who are interested in John Marin and our John Marin collection. I assure you it's a gorgeous show. We've had 3 couriers here from lending institutions, and they all seem very pleased by the way their work looks in coordination with our works. And it's certainly their works give our works a lot of tremendous context. I think we're just incredibly lucky. So John Marin's usually associated with New York and with his summer home in Maine. I think we can now add Arkansas to the list of great John Marin places. And we're so lucky that Norma Marin decided through her connections that led her to the National Gallery, where she gave 970 works, to put these here in a place that would be far from that and give a very different audience a chance to look at them. So here is John Marin at work, a really amazing character, I think. I'm sorry that Norma couldn't be here for this. At some point, her daughter, Lisa, will certainly come. She has been ill and so couldn't make it tonight either. But this is a picture of Norma Marin and John Marin Jr., her husband, and they both, after Marin had so carefully saved a great many of his working drawings and sketches, they made sure that they were preserved. It's easy to look at a big collection like this and think, gosh, he made a lot more drawings than most people. Mostly, I think, yes, he made a lot, but he saved them. He saved them, he kept looking at them, he used them. So things like this beautiful blue shark, as well as much more informal ones, were saved. And I think it's really kind of cool that this picture got taken by Charles Sheeler. They knew a lot of great photographers. And what is in this collection is not only beautiful completed watercolors, but a lot of working drawings and sketches. And since we have such a heavily drawing specialized collection, in addition to contemporary craft, this is a very appropriate place for it to have landed. And what you see in this picture is John Marin in his studio, and he is surrounded by stacks of sketchbooks back on tables behind him. So most of those sketchbooks have since been disbound, the pages taken out so that drawings could be shown and sold, and perhaps so that he could make use of them. The National Gallery preserves 19 bound sketchbooks. One is in the show, which is very lovely of them. And on the right is the image of the little yellow perch that is in that very tiny, lovely little sketchbook that dates back so early. But you can see that the drawings were very important to Marin. He kept them and he looked at them a lot. And I really want to thank our exhibitions department for making all of these that used to be just kind of little scattered sketches come together in such a beautiful collection. They have, the little working drawings have not been framed in an historic way because they probably wouldn't have been shown in Marin's time, mostly. Now and then they would get shown, but mostly, and if they were, they'd be sort of tacked to the wall. But we do have historic recreation frames for the watercolors to show you how they would have been shown. And there's one original George Off frame in the show. So this show introduces you to this magnificent collection, which has a lot of scattered strengths in various places. Some of them are real strengths for Marin, like the Maine watercolors and some of the great modern buildings in New York that were going up during Marin's lifetime. But other ones are more unusual. There are portraits and nudes. There are drawings of animals. There are all kinds of unusual specialties that this particular collection is very strong in. So who was John Marin? He was a major American watercolorist and modernist who lived 1870 to 1953. He's mostly known for his watercolors as well as his etchings. He also did oil painting, especially early and late. All of his watercolors, all his imagery was based upon drawing. In some cases, those were separate sketches. very often a whole group of sketches. He never seemed to make one particular sketch that would be exactly transferred to an etching plate or to a watercolor page or to an oil. He would work from whole groupings. But in many cases, like this watercolor, you can see that he did a drawing right on the page and then watercolored over it and then probably did some drawing on top of that. Because this is out in the country. He could set up an easel and stay and work and not be disturbed. When he was in New York City, he couldn't. There were crowds on the streets, so he would just go around with a little sketchbook and he would sketch in person. Then he'd take it back to the studio and finish it, maybe blow it up, change it to a different medium, make it a different size, work on it there. So that's why you will see a lot of drawings of New York. There are very, very few rural and particularly Maine drawings. There are some, but not very many. So that helps you to get into his working methods right there. And this is a show that really invites you to look into the working methods. Marin was part of what's called the Stieglitz Circle, a group of people around Alfred Stieglitz, who started out as possibly at the turn of the century the greatest photographer in the world, certainly one of the great ones. He was a tremendous hit in both European and American photography shows, and he started a gallery called the Little Galleries of the Photo Secession. And you'll see Stieglitz is here, third from the right. All the way on the right is John Marin. And originally Stieglitz was showing pictorialist photography there, but then he started to get interested in European modernists, and he had a sort of talent scout in Europe, Edward Steichen, in whose studio, 291 Gallery, which is what the nickname of the Little Galleries of the Photo Secession was because of its address on Fifth Avenue in New York. And Stieglitz started showing European modern works. He had the first shows in this country of people like Picasso and Matisse. And it's just incredible. It was this tiny little 2 rooms, this little place. One of his other artists, Marsden Hartley, called it the largest small room of its kind in the world. There was a tremendous amount of artistic ferment going on in this tiny little gallery. And so Stieglitz then eventually started showing American modernists, some of whom had been discovered in Europe, and Marin was perhaps the most prominent of those. He always loved to draw, all his life. He was born in 1870. Here's a picture of him with his mother. His mother died days after his birth. His father was a traveling salesman, so he was left to be raised by his Curry grandparents, that is, his maternal grandparents in New Jersey, around their orchards and fields. And then as they got too old and passed away, he had a pair of maiden aunts who raised him. But I gather that as an only child, and his father remarried later, so he had a stepbrother, but he didn't grow up with anybody else, he seemed to be a bit of a loner. He loved to just, as he said, I just drew. I drew every chance I got. He would be around in mountains and fields and forests and just drawing animals, drawing architecture, drawing landscape. He knew he wanted to make his living to do with art, but he wasn't sure what would actually be the way he would fail to starve to death. Here is his earliest dated drawing that is preserved from 1886 when he was 16. This is actually still in the estate, and in fact, until now, had not been reproduced in color. It had been reproduced in black and white in a catalog back in the 80s. So they dug this up in the house and photographed it for me. So it's not in the show, but I'm thrilled to be able to show it to you. You can see that he's, at this point, doing what I call high school realism, where you kind of can't let go of the contours. You're so conscious of trying to get every detail. So later in his career, he would get more into really being able to let go and give you gesture and expression and feeling. But here you just see his passion and his devotion and his hard work to it. So this is the beginning. And what he went on to do after trying to work at a Wholesale Notions house is he apprenticed with some architects in New Jersey and New York and learned architectural drafting, got very interested in architecture. He designed a few houses that, as he said, were for comfortable living. No, nothing glamorous or impressive. But that interest in architecture always lasted, and you can see we have these beautiful early architectural drawings in sketchbooks, or now removed from sketchbooks, many of them, but also these beautiful watercolors from all around the New Jersey area. But he realized that architecture that's not what he wanted to do. So he went back to school and studied at the Art Institute, the Pennsylvania Academy in Philadelphia, and also at the Art Students League in New York. And while he was doing these studies and later, he loved to wander down around by the waterfront and look at all of the things that were going on. You'll see ship masts in the background. The photograph here that Jody Rogers discovered and paired up with these images shows you where some of his work was done, and you can see the ships very clearly and the warehouses and things down around the New York docks. And also that Marin really records all of this very accurately in these early drawings. It's not the type of drawing we associate with modernist John Marin, but this is before he gets into that direction. This is when he is reacting more to illustrations he's seen, to architectural renderings, and to just being excited about this kind of work, this kind of architecture, this kind of thing going on down around the docks. Then he decided eventually in 1905 that he would go to Europe and try to do a little studying and work there and advance his career. What he wound up doing was his stepbrother, Charles Bettinger, was there and made an etching press and etching materials available to him. Of course, it's a method of printmaking. So if he could make etchings that would sell, particularly to the tourist trade of things around Paris and around Europe, he could make a living. And indeed, he actually is pretty successful at this. He made some wonderful prints, but he started to chafe at just making handsome architectural images. He wanted to really express himself. So you can see in this image, which is not in the show, there are all these crazy lines in the sky. They don't really have anything to do with what you'd actually see in the sky, but they are like the energy rising from the architecture and the people that he sees around him, and here in the middle of Paris. And this is the type of thing he wanted to do, and it started to come out in his watercolors and his etchings. And he said, oh gosh, no, my dealers have never put up with this, I'm just doing it for me. But he got some watercolors in the Salon d'Automne, which Edward Steichen saw in 1908. He sent images and excited descriptions back to Stieglitz in New York, and Stieglitz said, oh, I gotta have this guy. And they set up a show at 291 Gallery for 1909, a star was born. That's the moment Stieglitz will be Marin's, and it would be probably watercolors much like this, which is in the show, that he would have seen. So they're much looser, more expressive, starting to let go, as Marin would put it. And so Marin said that he mostly hung out with artists that were friends and hung out at the Café du Dôme, which is a famous place that a lot of artists hung out and played billiards. But he certainly also saw some of the modern art shows, and it really starts to get into his work, and Stieglitz really supports him. He will have shows at Stieglitz's gallery every year for the rest of Stieglitz's life. Stieglitz died in 1946, and after that, O'Keeffe and Marin got together and ran one of his remaining gallery for a few years, and then after that, Marin goes into other modern galleries like the Downtown Gallery. But because Stieglitz believed in him, put his money where his mouth was, Marin was able to make a living. So he settled back in his native New Jersey, but as I said, here's Stieglitz in a wonderful portrait by Steichen. So here is 291. It's these little rooms here hung with photographs, but you can just imagine them filled with Marin watercolors. So Marin, he actually goes back briefly to Europe and spends a little while in the Austrian Tyrolean Alps and in a little village called Kufstein. He's there for about 6 weeks, and he does these fabulous colorful watercolors. This is a different one that's in the show, but you can see there the intense greens and purples and blues and very direct, simplified brushwork. He brings this back when he comes to America. And here's where he settles. These are paintings he did looking out his front and back doors in Cliffside, New Jersey, where he had his studio and his home. And it's in a place where he's always across the river from New York. He doesn't live in New York, but he can go out and look across the river and see the skyline and study New York at a distance, and then either go over a bridge or take a ferry and see it right up close. So he does a great deal of that during the year. And here he is, being very much a part of 291 Gallery and the circle of people around Stieglitz. In this picture, he is hand coloring the cover for an issue of the brief-lived 291 magazine. The Maine magazine out of 291 was called Camerawork. This is a later one. As you can see, he's doing modern buildings. He's really getting into the skyline. And so when he left, when he'd gone from New York, this is much as the skyline would have looked. The buildings are tall, but they're not skyscrapers. I mean, just compare that in your head with what New York's like now. They're pretty stubby. He comes back, and the great age of skyscrapers has begun. The buildings are starting to rise, and he does these enchanted watercolors, beautiful little drawings and watercolors. It's probably a little tough for you to see. You'll have to look in the show. This shows, let's see if we can get the pointer to work. It's not working. Anyway, the top skyscraper there, anybody recognize it? No, that wasn't built to the 1930s. This is the Singer Building. This Singer Building was built in 1908. And the reason you don't know it, and I sure didn't know it before we looked it up, is it was torn down in 1967 and 1968, which was a tremendous scandal at the time. People got very upset that they took the Singer Building down. It had been this very dominating skyscraper on the New York skyline. And Marin loved it. It shows up incessantly in his work. So it's really strange for us. I mean, we don't know it. Its personality is strange to us, but it was this elegant brick building. And it shows up in this lovely painting where he's looking through the supports of the Brooklyn Bridge, through the wires of that bridge. So he gets to really love these views. And I'm leaving out a good many of his places, but in a lot of this talk, I want to introduce you to some of Marin's favorite places so you can see the decisions that he makes when he's doing these things. So he really gets interested in City Hall Park, which is very close to Ground Zero, by the way. If you've been down to visit that, you've been right in the area. This is City Hall Park as it is now. Many of the same trees are there. 100 years has gone by. They've grown up a good deal. He got really enchanted by this. Oh, excuse me. Come on back. There we go. Shows you some of these buildings. We tend to see these alone in Marin's work, but if you go there, you realize they're all in the same area. The municipal building, the Woolworth building, St. Paul's Chapel, which is the chapel nearest Ground Zero. You may often have seen pictures on TV. And the base of the Brooklyn Bridge are all within easy walking distance of the same place, and some of the other buildings there show up in drawings that we don't have. Here's a drawing that he did of St. Paul's. If you go there today, you'll see still, look at all this activity going on in the foreground. He's doing a really kind of classic, very detailed architectural rendering. He can definitely do that. We think of him as a modernist, simplifying and bringing out the action and the energy in things. He could really do very precise architectural drawings when he wanted to just record the information so he can go back to his studio and then think about it and interpret it. But in the foreground, he's catching the energy of all the people and horses and horse-drawn vehicles going by. So if you go there today, you'll see much the same thing. People, tons of people hurrying by. When I took this picture, they were working on the steeple, and you can see that the buildings around it have changed entirely. So it used to be more prominent. Now it's really surrounded by skyscrapers. But just down the street is where, in 1912, they started building the Woolworth building. It would become the tallest skyscraper in the world until the Empire State Building displaced it in the 1930s. But as you can see, it's not the only thing being built. At the same time, the municipal building's going up on the other side of the park. They both have cranes and scaffolding going simultaneously. So you can just see Marin down there all the time with a little pad of writing paper in his hand, something light, cheap, portable. He can make his drawings without having too much trouble with the crowds, and then take them home, bundles of them home. Jody Rogers and I worked on getting them into groups from the watermarks of this just ordinary stationery paper, because it really tells you that he's working on a whole bunch of things and what different groups are, because a lot of this, the style of these sketches, no, they wouldn't be dated, they wouldn't give you anything formal. He worked on some of these same subjects for many years, but we've been able to get them into groups and understand when they were done. And right in 1912, he's doing the municipal building as it goes up. And you'll see we have multiple drawings showing the cranes in place, showing the scaffolding, and then when you see it realized in watercolors, like this one from the Philadelphia Museum, and there's also one from the Met, and there are some others out there, you can see the red color is the rust of the iron substructure, the supports of the building before it's covered with stone. It's a big white gleaming building. Now you can see there in contemporary photographs that it's this big gleaming building. It's a little tougher to see now that the trees have grown up over 100 years, but even in Marin's day, he was having to kind of move the trees around visually so you'd really see the building. And indeed, if you look at the whole wall where these are hanging, there's a whole wall of municipal building in the show. You'll see him messing with the trees and trying to find the best way to show you that building. It's one of the things you see him work out in sketches, where to stand, sometimes where to imagine himself. Sometimes you can't get a physical point of view that will be the best to show what he wants. And this is one of the things that goes on in the Woolworth building drawings that he's doing at the same time. He'll be gathering precise information. This drawing was actually made after the building was completed. So it shows it right to the top. But these were done while it was under construction, and he's trying to figure out where to stand, how to be able to look past the trees, how to get some distance on this, how to show it to you and capture the energy that he feels from the buildings. As he feels it's not just the people. He says that, now while he's doing these drawings, he says the drawings, were mostly made in a series of wanderings around my city, New York, with pencil and paper and sort of shorthand writings, as it were, swiftly put down, obeying impulses of a willful, intoxicating mustness, of the nearness, of the being in it, being part of it, of that which to my eye went on, of the rhythmic movements of people on street, of buildings, a rearing up from sidewalk, a sort of mad wonder dancing to a way there up aloft. And none of that has a period. They're all dashes. That's the way they wrote in those days, the artists. You should see the letters. They're really quite amazing. So those drawings start to come together in a series of amazing watercolors that show him gradually abstracting and being more and more directly expressive of the modern energy that he feels in these buildings. The one on the left is incomplete. It's in our collection. It shows you that original watercolor in its brilliant, unshown previously very largely. It was probably shown a little bit because it had been attached to a board, so we know somebody was showing it, but mostly unshown, very, very brilliant. The one on the right is part of a famous group that were shown first at 291 Gallery and then down the street. And you can see here's the second one and the third one of this series, more and more abstracted. The one on the right, you can just see his gesture, just the flying into the air, this building ascending. These were shown at the Armory Show. This was, to this point, by far the biggest, most important, most reviewed, most reviled show of modern art in the history of this country. And it went on from very, very popular run in New York to be seen in Boston and Chicago. And Marin's watercolors of the Woolworth building went with it. So this really was when he starts to become very much of a national presence. His works are increasingly getting great reviews. They're being reviewed by the top critics in the country. So he's really doing, as he would say, cutting loose. And the way he describes these, I'll go back, shall we consider the life of a great city as confined simply to the people and animals on its streets and in its buildings? Are the buildings themselves dead? If these buildings move me, they too must have life. Thus the whole city is alive. Buildings, people, all are alive. And the more they move me, the more I feel them to be alive. It is this moving of me that I try to express. I see great forces at work, great movements, the large buildings and the small buildings, the warring of the great and the small. So this is what he really wants to get across. It's not just physical motion of people, walking, running, riding. It's not just the implied motion of kind of trembling, swaying, rising buildings. It's also the motion of his hand in drawing and how the path of his hand is like it's dancing across the page in a very expressive way. All of this comes together. So that was a statement that he published with these. Okay. And he also made these fabulous etchings of the Woolworth Building. So they're smaller and they're black and white, but they're so vibrant, they're incredible. This is one of the great etchings in the world that Philadelphia Museum very generously agreed to lend to us, and you can see that he's painting on this plate. In addition to the lines etched in with acid, he is painting their fingerprints, both adding ink and taking ink away, and then he adds more ink with perhaps brushes. He's scraping back in, putting all these little white lines and patches in with his fingers and with various kinds of tools. So every print of this kind, even from the same plate, would be completely different. And one of the things that Shelley was pointing out, the curator of this piece, is that this was the first building in New York that had what we'd call uplighting. It was illuminated at night, and it's this brilliant white stone building. So this may be part of what we're seeing here, is just the glow of this building. So he is just fascinated. He's also fascinated with a thing called the telephone building that's built later. I originally didn't know what the building was in this drawing, but I could see it's this amazingly powerful drawing. And Meredith Ward, who is one of the lenders for the show and the representative of the estate, said, I think it's the telephone building. See, it's got a flag at the top. And it's also very steeply seen from below. The telephone building, as you can see on the left there, is an enormous, heavy, massive building with multiple masses. And Marin was fascinated and drew it and painted it for decades. So I think the drawing in the middle is one of his many reactions. The watercolor on the right at Crystal Bridges certainly is. So that's the telephone building, which seems to be moving in front of Marin, and he's kind of like catching sight of it as it whirls upward in front of him. He just really became pretty obsessed, and there are also these very abstracted kind of stepping stone, almost ziggurat-like images that we think may also sometimes be derived from the telephone building. They may not really be any building in particular, but just a more general response to New York. But if anything, the telephone building ones lead to them. This is a tiny little watercolor we have. It's on a little piece of card. So he loved all this, but he also loved rural scenery. Marin had grown up in the country. He loved the country. He wanted to get away from all these scurrying people. Although he did love to capture the people. You'll see them gathered together in these wonderful big completed watercolors. We've borrowed several. But he loved to get outside. So here, just up the Hudson River, he got out to the Palisades, they're called, these amazing cliffs. They're just up the Hudson River. And so here's one of his watercolors. That's our cover image for the book. And a photograph, I just found the photograph on the web, but I thought it was just perfect to show you these intense colors. And again, he's really showing you this dramatic uplift. And in this case, it's the earth instead of buildings. So much the same spirit that you see in the telephone building and the Woolworth building. Out there in the Palisades, a place he would have known well as a New Jersey native. he could have been there often. And of course, Jody Rogers from the same area has spent a lot of time out there and knows the power of these pieces. Another place he went was the Ramapo Mountains, a little farther away, but they are in New York and New Jersey. And as you can see, it's very much wilderness, lots of trees and mountains, and apparently quite the difficult hike. Jody went out there with her friend Elizabeth Walsh, who took these pictures very kindly for us, and Michael Carr also with you. Anybody else? Was that it that day? And as you can see, if you look carefully, it's close enough that you can see the Manhattan skyline in the background. So there's that contrast, the two different worlds coming together in an image like that. We have what's perhaps the greatest collection of his Ramapo images I've ever seen, and it actually includes a couple of little sketches, little watercolor sketches. That's really unusual. Marin almost always just simply made a watercolor. He rarely did a sketch, and certainly rarely a color sketch. So it's wonderful. We have two sketches for the finished watercolor that's on the right. And I would guess that it just has to do with perhaps the fact that those are quite rugged mountains. And I am told by my friends who were there that this was, it was a really sweaty, difficult trip in June. Climbing up there was quite a challenge. And that tells you something about Marin. He was quite the outdoorsman. He loved to hunt and fish, as well as to boat and hike and draw, of course. And he was really willing to get out there and work hard and really get into the wilderness to get what he wanted. One place he did travel, he traveled all over the country in various places around New England, the mid-Atlantic. He got to New Mexico in the summers of 29 and 30. We have nothing from there. So I'm sorry about that. We'll have to work on it, but those are highly collected pieces, and we'll hope to add that in. But otherwise, we do very well on representing places that he got. We do extremely well. But Maine was really the home of his heart for many years. His friend Ernest Haskell in 1914 convinced him to go and spend his first summer in Maine. And you can see from this map that they started off, Small Point and West Point, where he was in the middle teens, are pretty close to Portland. They're not very far up the coast. It's not that remote. Although it's a little remote, I tell you, when I was driving out there, it was not always easy to find everything. And then in later years, they moved up to Deer Isle, much farther north. It's quite a wilderness isle with a fishing village on it, Stonington. And then in later years yet, in the 30s, they moved up to Cape Split. That's very remote and it's very northern and very beautiful, right on the coast. And finally there was where he bought a summer house in 1934. By the way, he bought it from a guy named Harry Prentice. You know how many Harry Prentices in New England there are in my family? I don't know whether he's a relative, but he could have been. It's spelled differently, but they came over in the 17th century, so who knows? This is the first house that he stayed in, Aliquippa House, which was right there in the Small Point, West Point area. And so he'd be out fishing and hunting and drawing. Here's some photographs of West Point. You can see it's absolutely a glorious place. Those are actually the last photographs I took on my trip. Lobster traps in the foreground here, very Maine. Here are the paintings that we have from West Point. I suspect we're looking at fog all the way here. He was really interested, Marin was, in the effects of light and atmosphere and how it relates to a place. This one is definitely called Fog West Point, but I suspect the other one is fog as well. And you can see, instead of just going gray, he's using blue to give you the coolness and distance and kind of melting quality of fog. I'm comparing it with a photograph that I took actually on Mount Desert Island, but it kind of shows you a similar composition where up in front the colors can be reasonably vivid, but they very quickly fade off and become much cooler in the fog. And while he was in the area, Stieglitz had scraped and put together a collection of $1,200 that Marin could live on for a year and go and work. And Marin got married at about this time, and his wife quickly became pregnant. And He goes up to Maine, he comes back 6 weeks later and says to Stieglitz, could you find me some more money? I bought an island. He fell in love with this lovely little island known as Marin Island to this good day. He went back and painted it often, but it had no source of water. You couldn't build there, you couldn't live there. You could visit, you could paint, but practical it was not. Stieglitz apparently managed to get money for them. They didn't starve to death, but I think he was a little annoyed. But Marin loved the place, and you'll see paintings that he did of Marin Island repeatedly. But he was really a serious outdoorsman. He really liked to be out there. He made friends with the neighbors. He became really attached to Maine. And this is also in that area. This is a beach on Small Point. I confess this is a private club where I had no business being. And this is a lovely little cabin where he stayed. And there's a description by Ernest Haskell. And he says he lived on a promontory, a wild, wonderful spot, a Marin spot, with the tree at the back of his cottage and the sea in front, on shelving rocks that went down to the sea. Once I found him painting on the limb of a tree, high up, painting with both hands. Marin was ambidextrous. He often painted with both hands. You'll frequently see pictures of him, at least with brushes in one hand and actively painting with the other. The other place right around there he was really attached to was, well, I got my clue as to what it was from this painting we have, this watercolor. It's called Morse Mountain, Small Point, Maine. So I thought, aha, there must be a mountain there. So I looked it up on the web, and I discovered that indeed there is a place. You can see it's called the Bates Morse Mountain Conservation Area, Bates being Bates College. So it's a conservation area where they do research and they keep things going. So I went out along the road you can see on this Google Maps picture and found the road that led off to where I knew the mountain was, and it looked terribly private. I wasn't at all sure I should drive there. But I turned off anyhow and came to a parking area and this lovely little booth where you could get maps and information. And they said, if you hurry, and this is when I had just flown into Portland, just dropped off my stuff and hurried out here. If you hurry, you can get to the mountain at sunset. So I hurried on up. You can see there's a path to the beach as well as up to the peak. And as you see on the right with the sunset, I made it. And that is what I saw. Isn't that fabulous? You can see why Marin went back to this place for decades, back and back and back. There are lots of paintings. On the left is this rock outcropping on the top of this. It's a modest mountain. I walked up it. You can't call it climbing. There's a paved path to the top now, but it gives you this great view. There are private houses behind you, so you can't go back very far, but there's this rock outcropping and these wonderful pine trees that grow in it. And then you're looking across a salt marsh with these wonderful little winding water channels. And then there are more hills on the other side, and in the distance, the water of the ocean breaking on the beach. Fabulous. So that's where our little watercolor clearly was made. And once you've been there, then you understand what you're seeing. This is the tree on the rock outcropping, and what's behind it, you're probably catching a glimpse of some salt marsh. This fabulous painting showing the tree on a rock. This is on the cover of the Art Institute of Chicago's catalog. So that's where it is. Here's one that Portland has. You can very clearly see the salt marsh channels in the background. So that's 1926. So we're already into the next decade. Here's another one we have, same area, probably on a foggy day. Very abstracted one. This is the only picture in the collection to have been shown at 291 Gallery. It's marked on the back of the backboard that it was. It's also on the checklist, so very clearly it was. I think that's Marin's handwriting on the back, right? I think, maybe. And then I can't tell you where this was, but because it's 1917, it's probably there. I love it. Wet greens by the sea, very Maine. This was our Christmas card we had in the shop. Wonderful little picture of a probably pine tree on the same rock outcropping or a very similar one. But then after that, he started going north. So he went up to Stonington on Deer Isle, and Deer Isle has a lot of lovely paths, but it also has this beautiful little village And here it is as shown in a watercolor on loan from Columbus. So very much as it is now. Here's the house he rented when he was there, which is out in an area west of town called Green Head. And the cool thing was you turn around, and that's what you see. You're looking out to sea. You're looking out through the islands and the ships and the lobstering area. And as you can see in the old postcard, in his day, fewer houses had been built. He had quite a lovely view there, so much less blocked in those days. So he would do a lot of pictures of the islands and of the port, but then he also took off and hiked up all sorts of trails. Again, the real outdoorsman. He is simplifying what he sees and really bringing out the greens, simplifying the shapes and the colors to really get to the essence and the energy of where he is. I went out on some of the trails. I, of course, can't tell you whether they're the same trails, but in the spirit of the thing. So it really kind of shows you the details he eliminated and what he captured about the growth of the trees and the richness of the green and the lushness of that wet, thriving kind of pine forest. And then the final place that he went and lived was on Cape Split, which you can see on the map. It's because the cape splits at the end. You know, it's like the mouth of an animal. And that is the house that they bought in 1934, right there on the rocks. Oh, it's fabulous views, absolutely fabulous. It's been added on to over the years. Norma still lives there. They welcomed me. I've got to tell you, though, if you try driving out there, I mean, tell them you're coming, because there is rather a sign as you get close that essentially says, go away. Private. But that's, I think, you know, it's just so people won't bother, I think, particularly the other family. There are 2 compounds out there. This is looking through the windows of the house as it is now. So he could be indoors and look right out to the islands and the rocks. So you see something like our painting here of a smoky sou'wester, as he calls it. So I guess, you know, very foggy, lots of water in the air. He's really simplified the colors to the gray and the white spume on the waves. But he, of course, because he's got that house, he can be indoors looking out the window. But he did love to be out on the rocks drawing. Don't you love this pictures were provided by the family? So there he is with what looks kind of like a watercolor pad, and you can see his watercolors next to him. There's a cover on them, but that little white rectangle next to him is a set of watercolors. So he might have been working on something like this. Very soft, delicate little abstraction. There are some boats out there and little distant islands. Very late. Probably done around Cape Split, he doesn't say. He did visit a few other places where he didn't actually live. He would visit Mount Desert Island frequently. He never lived there, but it's gorgeous. So here's a beautiful little watercolor, the vivid colors. He loved it. You can see in his letters that he would try to get there every year when he could. And he also would get out to some of the land around Cape Split, way up there. Washington County is the biggest county in Maine, and one of their big exports is blueberries. These days they've cleared the rocks and the trees off of the blueberry barrens so that they can do really big commercial planting and harvesting. In Marin's day, they had the rocks and the trees, and it's those irregularities that he loved, and the craggy rocks and the contorted trees. Ruth Fine, who's one of the great authorities on Marin, did a wonderful show at the National Gallery in 1990, says that he tended, and I think his drawings and watercolors bear this out, to identify with trees, particularly individual trees, as if they were people, as if they're characters. And in this little drawing, we have 3 trees. And so I kind of start to think that perhaps this from 1952 would be symbolizing Marin and his wife, who had died in 1946, and his son, who had gone off to war and then come back. But they remained, of course, always the very, very close family, identifying with nature, just loving it. And, of course, so the family is headquartered there during the summers still. So I hope that you will go up and enjoy the show. that's it.